You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. First, though, a reminder of our top stories here this evening. And Jeremy Corbyn says Labour is in good heart despite losing a safe seat held by the party for more than 80 years to the Tories. Sky News team has been on the front line of Iraqi forces' push into western Mosul as the battle against Islamic State in the city enters its most dangerous phase. And Donald Trump has stepped up his attacks on what he calls fake news. He's also told Conservative activists that the Mexico border wall would be built ahead of schedule. Hello there, you're watching the press preview. Our first look at what's on the front pages as they come in. Over the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the director of the Institute of Ideas, Claire Fox, and the editor of the New European, Matt Kelly. So hello to both of you.
Hi.
So let's take a look then at what's on the front pages. And the Eye leads with the fallout from the Copeland by-election and renewed questions over Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party. The Times quotes former Foreign Secretary David Miliband, who says Labour is in its weakest position for 50 years. The Telegraph focuses on Theresa May's attempts to brand the Conservatives the party of working people. The FT's Weekend Edition reports that the government wants to plug a hole in public finances by curbing payments to people with disabilities and health problems. The Guardian says air pollution levels are now above the legal limit at 1 in 4 London schools. The Mail quotes Transport Secretary Chris Grayling asking motorists to think about air pollution before they buy a diesel vehicle. The Express once again has damning words about EU migration, this time saying it's a threat to pensions. And the Mirror reports that Whirlpool is being accused of delaying compensation payments to customers forced out of their homes by appliance fires. So lots there to talk about with Claire Fox and Matt Kelly. And inevitably, a lot of the papers cover the fallout from the by-elections yesterday. So let's take a look at the Eye, which you've picked out first of all. Their main focus is on Jeremy Corbyn there, in the headline at least. Corbyn given final warning by union chief. And it was a pretty bad by-election results for Jeremy Corbyn, particularly in Copeland.
Dreadful, catastrophic. The fact that Len McCluskey and other union chiefs are openly now saying that Corbyn's time may well be up soon, I think is indicative of the crisis. But you do wonder about the guy's hold on reality. When he comes out and says that the party's in good heart. It's either, in my opinion, it's either disingenuous or he's deluded. The MPs I speak to, and I speak to them on a regular basis, are in a chronic state of despair. Everybody's playing a waiting game. They know that they're unelectable as things stand. It's a crisis, I think, for the country, not just for the Labour Party, that we have such a weak opposition at a time where really we're in a period of the country's history where we need good debate and good, powerful conversation about these incredibly important things that are happening to us. And I think you've got a guy in Jeremy Corbyn who's actually much more interested in transforming the Labour Party into some sort of socialist, neo-Marxist organisation than he is about winning power. And from my point of view, the only point of being the opposition, in fact, it's the obligation of the opposition, is to be a powerful opposition to government and eventually to try and aim to be government. And it just seems impossible right now that Jeremy Corbyn could achieve that for the Labour Party.
It is very unusual, isn't it, for the government to gain a seat like this. It hasn't happened for a generation, as some papers are pointing out. Jeremy Corbyn might say, though, but I did hang on to Stoke.
But you can say you hung on to Stoke is what it was. I mean, the turnout was atrocious. The thing that the Stoke election indicated to me was just how there was no one to represent the ordinary people of Stoke, and they it wasn't an apathetic to, because you can't now say the people of Stoke don't vote, they're not interested in politics, because of course they turned out in their droves for the Brexit vote, where they voted with a massive turnout. Yeah. So I think this is an indication of the disillusion with the mainstream parties. And with UKIP, which, by the way, in terms of the Stoke voters, I think would indicate that they voted to leave the EU, not for UKIP, which is sometimes people try and conflate those two things. I think the difficulty with this approach to it, though, as the eye has given us, is it does reduce it to personalities, and I think it's a more historic point than this. See, I don't think the demise of the Labour Party is due to Jeremy Corbyn, and I don't think that the knives out for the UKIP leader Nuttall. You know, everything's like sort of like, oh, well, if we only change the leader again, all will be well. I think there's a much more profound crisis of what the Labour Party is going through and its inability to connect with or represent its, you know, the ordinary working people as it would have previously. The working classes don't have a representation here. And I think if we go on to maybe the next, we get a sense of what I'm talking about if we look at the front page of the Times, which is Labour's weakest for 50 years, says Miliband, and
David.
David, and he's got a point. But this is somebody who failed to take a lead in the Labour Party. He's kind of not been around, you know, not exactly ran away, but where's he been? He's not taken responsibility. Within the family, part of what we have to remember is that Corbyn is a result of Ed Miliband's failures. And so this idea that somehow Corbyn is the problem and you can just simply put a new leader in, I think, completely misunderstands the crisis in and the emptying out and the hollowing out of the Labour Party over recent years.
And Labour has got a particular challenge at the moment, doesn't it, over the Brexit vote, given that its voters are so polarised.
This is the problem when you're terrified of your constituents, you're terrified of deselection, you're terrified to act with conviction. This is what you get. You get paralysation. And the Labour Party is currently paralysed by fear. They don't want to, the PLP, the Parliamentary Labour Party, don't want to fall out with Corbyn. They know there's no upside to visibly rebelling against Corbyn, because if you do that, what happens is Mrs May gets even more bolder, calls an early general election, the Houses of Parliament get filled with hard-right Brexiteers. That is the end of the Labour Party if that happens. I think very interesting David Miliband coming out at this stage. He's been in New York for the last 3 or 4 years running a big international aid agency, biding his time. I think there's a big sense that maybe they did elect the wrong brother. Well, maybe he's queuing himself up now for a bit of a comeback. Well,
that's right, because he says, asked about his future, I honestly don't know what I'm going to do. It's hard to see, but what's the point of saying never? So he doesn't.
When a politician says, what's the point of saying never, you might as well say, put my name down on the ballot card now.
Yeah, but he didn't win the last time he was on the ballot paper.
Right.
It's not as though, I mean, you know, it's
times
like
have changed,
you know, he lost. Yeah, well, what I'm saying is all a bit desperate. You know, the person who lost before might come back to save us. But it's interesting, I actually think, that he references Macron as well from the French presidential election. It's become something of a phenomenon here that the Labour Party is saying, oh, look, great, there's somebody who's sort of centre-left and pro-European. There's one person, at least in France, who looks quite popular. Maybe we can emulate that. But I think that is hardly the story of the French presidential elections at the moment. And I just think there's a desperation in trying to find a model for a kind of social democracy that's effectively sold people out for a long time, hasn't really known what to offer them with anything substantial or principled.
And a very quick question about Theresa May. Clearly she's delighted at this win in Copeland. She's saying there, we're the Workers' Party now. Should she call a general election? Obviously there's the fixed-term Parliament bill, which might be a bit of an issue, but would she be wise to try and capitalise on the current mood?
Look, what would happen right now if she called a general election is Labour would get absolutely tanked, and the Conservatives, the hard right end of the Conservative Party, would fill the House of Commons, which obviously, in my view, looking at it from a pro-European stance, would be an utter disaster, not just for the Labour Party but for the country. So I think it's unlikely that she will do. I think, as you say, there are many complications in the way, but there's no doubt at the moment she has got the mood of a certain part of the nation. She's riding high, and she's got, in my view, a short window before all of the problems from the triggering of Article 50 start kicking in. So this may be as popular as Theresa May is going to be for the next 2 or 3 years, so who knows.
And a very quick point about UKIP, if we can, just to go back to the front of the eye, where they are mentioned, as you pointed out there, knives out for UKIP leader Nuttall as he falls short is one of their bullet points there. What does this mean for UKIP, do you think? I mean, they had great hopes, didn't they, of trying to take away Labour seats, especially in Leave areas, and that hasn't worked out for them. Do they have a future?
I mean, I think that there's been a kind of myth around the Brexit vote that UKIP was what done it, and they believed it. So did the media. Everybody keeps saying it, and it had nothing to do with them. And so actually, it's not just that, oh, they've delivered Brexit, now what have they got to say? Actually, they had very little to do with Brexit. That's not what happened. And so I think they've been fooling themselves. I think that they are not a substantial political party that have anything distinct to say, and that has been revealed. And there is obviously this horrible, vicious infighting. You know, Farage has already condemned, we can't make it up, Farage in America speaking to a Conservative event there with Donald Trump, attacks Nuttall here and says, well, I wouldn't have done it that way. You've got all of this viciousness going on behind the scenes. I think that just how that relates, though, to, you know, Theresa May being able to say she's the Workers' Party, is that what a disaster we have where the Conservatives, the Tories, proclaim themselves to represent the workers. But then those people who say, no, you're horrible to workers and you're vicious and you're mean, and what about poor people, which I've seen a lot on social media in reaction to this, misunderstood that there's an aspiration here that people do not want to just be treated like there's something about the Labour Party, it's kind of paternalistic. We're going to look after the poor people. We did a lot on the NHS. There was leaflets going around saying you'll really suffer under the Tories, and it's just not good enough as a political programme that needs to be future orientated and positive.
I'm going to whiz us on.
Just dead briefly on Nuttall. I think he's exposed as a phony, but I think UKIP is a phony party, walking around dressing like gamekeepers, telling people that they're, you know, on their side and how they're going to revolutionise the country. They are a busted flush, and I think people like Aaron Banks, who back them, will be looking very much about whether they put their money into a new venture soon. OK, well, that's your view. Well, let's see how that pans out. We'll watch in the months and years ahead. Let's take a quick look, before we go to a break, at this story. This is actually to do with the assassination of Kim Jong-un's half-brother. And it's just a story that gets wilder and wilder and really quite scary. Well, it doesn't scare me. I just find it fantastical. I mean, I don't mean it fantastic. I mean, just extraordinary. It's like I get the feeling these days we're living in one big movie. You know, you got Trump, Brexit, you got this guy, you got Ranieri we're going to come on to. I mean, strange, bizarre events that screenplay writers would have got laughed out of Hollywood if they'd have tried. And anyone who's followed this story, I mean, we've got to remember there's a poor guy has been murdered here, but the sequence of the story, Hollywood couldn't cook it up, you know. It is quite extraordinary. And the reason that, and to save this young lady's modesty, I'm going to zoom in on the column here that talks about the VX. The reason I said it was scary was because obviously the accusation is that North Korea is behind this, and that they have used VX, which is what the Malaysian authorities have said, this deadly toxin, classified as a weapon of mass destruction. Had you heard of it before this, Anna? I had heard of it, but I couldn't tell you its proper. I couldn't give you those bullet points. Let's put it that way. But it is, I mean, just a drop the size of a pinhead can kill someone. So again, it's like a fictional device, isn't it?
Exactly, 150 times more deadly than sarin. And although you are saving the modesty of the young woman, it is, as you say, it's the whole thing. Am I being a prude? No, the point I was making is that, you know, if you sort of said, and there we have glamorous assassin who uses 150 times stronger than sarin model, posing with a motorbike, killing the brother of the... I mean... It looks like the trailer for a James Bond movie, doesn't it? But on a serious point, you know, people love this story as fantastical, but obviously it's an indication of when we sort of, you know, say, oh, Trump is like a monster and all the rest of it. This is what the real autocrats, the real authoritarian regimes can do. Give him time. Come on. OK, we're going to take a break. Lots more to talk about shortly, including why finance trumped romance at Leicester City. Welcome back. You're watching the press preview with me tonight, Claire Fox and Matt Kelly. And you picked out the front page of the Daily Mail to kick off this section, which focuses on pollution, essentially, isn't it? You can't move but for stories of pollution at the moment, and air pollution. And I've got to the point where I have to say I'm trying to talk to people who are experts and trying to get to the... You know, it's got all the hallmarks of a slight moral panic, and people worrying about primary school kids. But one of the things that we picked up on here, and the Mail has as well, is the attack on diesel vehicles, and the Transport Secretary suggested there should be an imminent clampdown on these vehicles. Now, the thing about it is, and this is what's really ironic, is that it was in fact the last Labour government that told motorists to go out and buy fuel-efficient diesels so that they could be the kind of environmentally responsible ones. And now they're actually getting in the neck and being blamed for polluting children's primary schools with, and so on and so forth. We kind of get toxic air risk in 1 in 4 London schools. So I think that one of the morals is that we have to be careful about letting government ministers tell us you must behave in a socially responsible way by buying this car or doing this, because actually in this instance it's backfired quite
to use
literally.
a vehicular
It's tough,
partner.
isn't it, if you've just bought a diesel car, as I have, and now you're suddenly realising that not only are you likely to be on the thick end of a rise in tax, it's going to be less valuable when you come to sell it, and you're also going to be marked out as the guy who is responsible for the deaths of thousands of children over the nation. It's hard lines, especially when it was the government that was telling us to go out and buy diesel themselves.
Interesting that the by-elections haven't made the front page there of the
Yeah,
Mail,
very
and
strange,
they make
yeah.
a side column in the Guardian, don't they? There on,
Yeah,
on
I
their
think
front
just
pages.
to comment on that, which is that, and actually we noticed on a number of the tabloid front covers, no sign of the elections
Yeah.
at all, and I think it does indicate the low turnout, the fact that kind of in this instance politics has disengaged people, certain disillusion. They've usually got the finger on the pulse, and
Weird,
they
though.
haven't really quite captured it.
Weird for the Mirror and the Guardian, Labour being such a big story and for it to feature so little. On those front pages.
I'm going to dive into the Mail now, because you've picked out a story about this suggestion that people would be able to do a kind of fast-track university degree, but it would cost you the same, is that right, in terms of tuition fees?
I think that's the idea, isn't it? That they're going to condense it down to 2 years, shorten holiday times, make you work harder. Sounds to me, if that's possible, why aren't they all 2 years long? But as a non-university graduate, I've got that chip on my shoulder.
I'm sorry, it's a very Philistine move, and it's the sort of complete destruction of what the university is, but it now reduces university to what we all suspect it's becoming, which is just a kind of glorified route to job market, rather than going to study and broaden your mind and so on. And there are people, of course, who are reacting, saying, you know, pile them high and teach them cheap. Dangerous kind of route. Sally Hunt, the University and College Union, rightly pointing out that our universities must remain places of learning, not academic sweatshops. I think the problem is that for the young people it might appear to be appealing. You know, get it done quickly so you can go out and earn the money to pay back the loans.
And save a year's worth of rent as well.
And you get, yes.
But Claire...
But it's not, it just misses the soul of going to university. I don't think 50% of young people should go to university. I think that's been a destruction of what a university education is. I understand the appeal to young people. I'm just saying it's going to destroy what a university education is.
This is my point, it puts more and more pressure that university, not to go to university, is somehow a failing, and that shouldn't be the way.
Absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, we've got to talk about Claudio Ranieri, haven't we? There he is on the top of the Mirror's front page. Yesterday my dream died. A rather moving statement that he put out today.
Well, I know you guys are massively upset for Ranieri, and I feel sorry for the guy, and I think it's a remarkable story. However, football is littered with acts of brutality against managers and players, and it's the most unsentimental business on the planet. And, you know, poor old Gary Lineker's been crying into his crisps, and everybody's really sad, and Claudio on, what was it, 5 million a year or whatever, you know, his dream is dead. On the front page of the Financial Times, perhaps the other side of the story, tiny little nib there, £100 million shortfall for Leicester City if they get relegated, and they're a point above the relegation zone.
I don't
now,
think you're absolutely brutal and corporate in your approach there.
I am, yeah.
I mean, but the thing is that this wasn't just, oh, you know, he's had a bad season. What this manager did with Leicester was historically extraordinary in the world of sport and football. Yes. And as Mourinho says, they should be naming a stadium after him, right? There should be legacies, right? So the idea is, like, he's had a bad year, get rid of him. I don't think you have to be overly romantic and sentimental to think this is rather harsh.
Anyway, we're going to leave it there. We're going to have the last word on this one. Sorry, Matt. Matt and Claire, lovely to see you both. And you'll be back again at 11:30 with another selection.
Great.
See you then.